Now, what about in the case that you've gotten really lean? Maybe you've gotten to the end of a fat loss phase or end of like a contest prep, and you're like, okay, like I have muscle and my waist isn't like ridiculously big or wide, but generally the shape that I have, even when I'm like posing and like really sitting into my glutes or like really like flexing, like it's not as um it's not as freaky, it's not as X frame or S frame, however you wanna call it, and I almost think about it that, like, this way I think about it just like ratios is like, okay, your clavicles to your waist, and it's really your clavicles to your rib cage to your pelvis. It's like truly bone structure. That is gonna be what, like, I refer to as, like, someone's natural frame. That matters actually quite a bit. I can tell you, like, I have pretty, like, wide clavicles, so and I have pretty big traps too, which is why I'm always, like, putting my hair here. Um, that, makes it where I don't necessarily need as much muscle in my upper body, but with that, having a smaller rib cage, like, my actual rib cage shape is not very broad, it's quite narrow, and because I have not necessarily a shorter torso, but there's not, Phoebe finally she finally clarified this. She's like, "You don't really have a short torso." But she's like, The space in between your ribs and your pelvis is very short, like that portion, which is actually an important distinction, which I'm not gonna get too much into now, but, small ribs as opposed to a wider rib cage, that will improve that taper, and then when you look at, like, pelvic width, this is where, like, having a wider pelvic bones, like your ilium, like, that can actually give you better ratios naturally. Now it's important if we're talking about someone with wide hips, um, who's competing, let's say, and like, I mean, I know Allison, like Testu, y'all really loved that episode I did with her. And we talked like in and about, like we completely broke down her physique. And one of the things that she was talking about how she struggled with in producing the look that's now qualified her for the Olympia is like balancing out her wide hips relative to her glute meats. And I know that's something she even said. She's like, I have to work on that, like going into the Olympia because my hips are wider, you don't get almost like I wanna call it muffin top of the glute med. You don't get that, like, very pretty, like, heart-shaped, whereas if someone's hips are more narrow, even adding a little bit of muscle will create that curvature and not necessarily in a boxy way, but it'll give you more roundness and shape. And we see the same thing with, like, tie-ins is, like, if you have very short tie-ins, you don't necessarily need as much tissue per square inch as opposed to if you have very long tie-ins, to get that same kind of projection, especially in the front pose, you're gonna need more depth and density, so it's actually more muscle in the long run, so, these are all the things that, like, go into creating, especially for stage, creating that balanced physique and creating a lot of depth and projection, but when we're talking about just, like, generally walking around day to day, I can say, like, for someone who is looking to improve the shape of their waist to make it a little more X-frame, a little more hourglass, it doesn't necessarily mean you just have to shrink your waist or bring your waist in dramatically. I mean, like, yes, if you have body fat to lose, that will help. But I can say, like, I've had a fairly small waist most of my life, and even at heavier weights, even when it's only 24, 25 inches, having more muscle up top and down low, that has helped so much in the improvement in the actual shape itself. And for the upper body, this comes down to developing your shoulders and your lats to really widen your frame. And especially from the back, we have to consider like your rear delts, your teres major, teres minor, but your lats themselves, like they can really help accentuate your waistline, and make you kind of look like an upside down triangle, which I think is a very aesthetic look. And if you're going for like the full hourglass, if you want like that lower body taper as well, this is gonna come down to your glute max, your glute med, and I would even say your legs a little bit too. And this is something like I have been very reserved on. Um, really speaking about publicly, but like as I get leaner, I've seen like my legs have come up from last season, and I have little stick legs anyway. I just carry a lot of fat there, so it's very deceiving, especially in the off season. But like seeing that there's more muscularity on my legs, specifically like my upper quads, I'm like, okay, cool. This actually adds like really good curves to my frame, for my pelvic width, like the diameter of my pelvis. So I mean, like it's something I know in bikini. It's like, you know, a cardinal sin to be like, you should grow your quads. But realistically, I think there are a lot of competitors, especially now, who are actually being told, like, your quads, it's not that you need more detail, but you need more taper. And like realistically, if you don't have that density in the lower body, even like right underneath the glute, it's not as mature of a physique. It's not as dense as we want. And I promise this isn't to say like, oh, bikini's moving to like quad dominant. Like, no, that's all wellness all day. But realistically, I do think there's some degree of lower body development as a minimum that you need to have, that a lot of people in recent shows have like been very public about. Like, yeah, like I need more glutes, but I was actually told also like I need a little bit more quad, a little bit more hamstring. Now, in the case that you have been avoiding direct shoulder work or lat work or quad work, or even glute work, which I don't think many of y'all are avoiding that. I think most women I speak with have just a high degree of glute volume in their training, like, by proxy. And um, if there are muscle groups that you're avoiding, I would just be very clear on like why you're avoiding them. I'll say, like, I don't want to have more biceps or triceps because of how developed my upper body already looks, with my rhomboids and my traps being a little bit bigger, my delts being bigger, having wider clavicles. I know that like if I put more tissue on my biceps, it's only going to mean that like to have that taper of the delts, that like my delts will have to get bigger, which I don't necessarily want. And I think that's something just to be cognizant of, is like as you're building out your upper body and your lower body, like what is the actual look that you want? Do you want lower quads? Do you want really thick and like meaty hamstrings? Of course, everyone seems to want like an hourglass shape, so that's going to be glutes and delts, and then like bringing your waist in. But really, like the best strategy I think to go about that is just to focus on getting really fucking strong in specific movements, and then having a method to consistently track that strength increase. Yes, like hypertrophy, like that can be accomplished through several different ways. But for me, I think the most efficient way is honestly like having some strength goals in mind, spending an adequate amount of time ironing out any instabilities at the shoulder, at the hips, at the pelvis, so that that doesn't become a bottleneck that catches up with you. Because I think for a lot of people, that is kind of their like gateway to like, oh, I can't continue to build. When in reality, it's like this is an issue with function, not necessarily that you've maxed out your natural potential. Bottom line, building more muscle can actually help and can accentuate and create the illusion of a smaller waist. So that would be something that I would recommend doing if, like, just reducing body fat in itself is not enough to get the look that you're aiming for. So measuring that hypertrophy, measuring that progress, I would use a tape measure. I would measure the areas that you want to grow and the areas that you don't want to grow, especially if we're talking about someone who is knowingly going to be putting on body fat, which is very, very normal and expected in a build. Um, Monitor those strength progressions, be on the lookout for any kind of indication that you are now compensating for poor function. And if that's something that like you're equipped to do yourself to manage and iron out, great, do it yourself. If you're not, hire a coach, hire me to help do that. Hire me for a one-time consult. Like, I mean, literally the amount of people that sign up for, literally, like, they're just like, I want to speak with you for 60 minutes about my training. I want you to write a training program for me that I can then run myself. Like, that is so gratifying and rewarding. And it doesn't like, I don't have to be involved in like all of your programming, but I think that's one that like a lot of people sleep on, and they don't realize how much more they can get out of their physiques if their training is being closely managed. And of course, if you have it within your budget and you see the value in it, getting a DEXA, I mean, like, you do have to be careful because lean muscle mass and like how DEXAs actually read lean mass as opposed to fat mass, that can vary pretty heavily. So we just need to be cognizant that you're not like me and you get a DEXA and it says you lost muscle and then you get like really down, you start having a pity party. And I say that jokingly, but at the same time, like it is a very real thing. And I work with clients all the time who like as they're going through fat loss phases, they'll see those fluctuations in lean mass because it's actually accounting for other like aspects of fluctuations, whether that be water retention, GI weight, inflammation, and they're not really able to piece together like why there was such a vast fluctuation in one read versus the other. So if you're not familiar with like how to distinctively like parse out what fluctuations are normal, which ones actually might be indicating you're losing muscle, I would specifically in that case, I would work with an expert or hire someone to help you kind of make sense of that.